So this is one of my Stroppel canes with a twist. I am using whatever cane remnants I have from that mandala lotus cane, link up in the cards and also in the video description. So what you want to do is to chop your cane remnants, but not very small, because if you chop them too small you're going to lose a lot of the effect. And after chopping them, I layer them between sheets of white clay on a medium thin thickness. As you can see, you need to get at least 2 layers. I'm putting here like 4 layers. And once you finish layering, you need to use your roller over them to make sure that you have no air trapped in there. This effect, normally a Stroppel cane is done with black clay, but I like to do mine with other clay colors, and as you can see, this one looks like a very pretty marble-like pattern. I don't know how to call it, I just know that it's beautiful. And it looks better when it's done with clay colors that are of the same family pretty much. And this is why I took the opportunity to use the remnants from that mandala lotus cane, because they are all very pretty blues and a little bit a touch of wasabi green and stuff. So once you consolidate your Stroppel cane, you cut slices of it. As you can see, they're about 1.5 millimeters. And for the necklace, I'm going to use this pretty baking blank. And I'm cutting my slices in 2 and then joining them by gently overlapping about 1 millimeter. And if you use a different baking blank, of course, you'll have to overlap them full, not just in half. After which I make sure that my veneer is all nice and flat and doesn't have any kind of dimples and dents, and I simply place it on my baking blank. I'm trying to get everything in the picture because it's kind of a large project and a little bit difficult to get in the camera so you can see the details but still see everything. As you can see, I'm using my roller to gently fold, not too sharp at first, not all at once. Make sure that you don't try to do all at once. Gently fold the clay over the rim of your baking blank until you get pretty much to a 45-degree angle, and as you roll with your roller over the baking blank, most of the clay will just get cut, but nevertheless do a fine trim using your X-Acto knife or your blade, whichever you're more comfortable with. Now here you'll have to be very careful that both arms of your necklace are of the same length. As you can see, the one on the right needed a little bit shortening. And this one, after I do just a pinch more softening the corners, will be ready to be baked. But before I bake it, I will make a second Stroppel cane block so I can make also a bracelet. And of course you can make also earrings or beads or whatever you want, but in this one I just wanted a nice necklace with a matching bracelet. As you can see, I'm reducing my block until it is pretty much the width of my bracelet baking blank, and this time I am cutting my slices about 2 millimeters thick. After which I will be overlapping them the same way, only that about 2 millimeters. And as you can see, I'm using the lines, this time crosswise on the bracelet, not in length like I did on the necklace. And you want to overlap them a little bit more because you want some strength in your bracelet. And after I do that, once again, of course, I need to make sure that everything is fairly flat, but after I put it on the bracelet blank, I will be able to do a little bit more flattening. So place your veneer directly on the blank. It is thick enough. It should be about the thickness of the thickest setting on your pasta machine. And then once again, with your roller, start folding over the edge. And the same as for the necklace, once you gently keep going over it, just increasing the angle until you get to do it flat, the clay will be pretty much cut. All the excess clay will be pretty much cut and fall off. And the same as for the necklace, you need to get back to it and do some really nice fine trimming. And this is why I said I'm going to work on the flatness after I put it on the baking blank. Simply by rolling it on the tile, it's going to flatten it enough. And it's ready for baking. Now, once that bakes, we'll need to put some backing on it. And I'm going to use this zebra, that's how it's called, texture mat, just because it goes through the pasta machine. And I'm doing the clay at a medium thick setting, after which I will be putting it through the pasta machine on a thickest setting with the texture mat. And you don't want to go too thin when you go with them together because it's going to crack. Then placing some bacon bond on the back of my bracelet. And when you place it there, press from the middle towards the edge to remove any air bubbles, and then gently start folding over the excess clay. And that's going to determine how you place your full backing. I'm going to use an X-Acto knife to cut rough cut the extra clay, and this is from that white Premo clay that's all sticky and nasty, and it's not good for much. So I thought that it's really good for putting some backing on a piece. And especially with this white Stroppel cane, it matches perfectly. So after doing the rough trim, you want to go in and do a more precise trim, just to be easier to do the perfectionist trim later. Once you trimmed off all the excess clay, use your fingers to pretty much smooth over the edge. But here you have to cut, and it's not very hard to show you here on the bracelet. I'll show you better on the necklace. You need to remove the backing on a small area where you're going to place the bail. Then use your roller again at an angle on the edge to do a nice, smooth and even backing. And I'll use the same zebra texture mat for the necklace. You see I cut in a little bit of a diagonal because the necklace is a little bit thicker in the middle than going down on the arms. And I'm going to cut also in a diagonal so that I can put together the two halves of the backing and join them as much as possible smoothly, because I don't want that to look just slapped there. So as you can see, I made it so the lines of the zebra texture go crosswise on the necklace. And then I am going to remove the excess clay, the same as I did for the bracelet. First in a rough trim, and then going with the roller first. And remember, whenever you roll over the clay, raw clay over baked clay, it will pretty much, the raw clay will get cut on the baked clay edge. The thing is, while you're working on the necklace, while you're working on it, it will become a little bit flat. And this is why at the last baking, you kind of need to lean it over again over the baking blank. But here you go. This is how I'm doing those little cutouts. Let's look closer for placing the bail. So just cut a small rectangle and then put everything back together. And then I'm going to nicely smooth the edges and even use some alcohol. Now let's do some edging. And yes, you want to do this edging separately. I ran my clay through the pasta machine on a medium setting. This was a 5 on a Makins. And then you place bacon bond or liquid clay on the edge of your piece. And then place the sheet, the strip of clay over it, and gently fold both in the front and in the back. You just have to be very careful that all the clay really sticks to the edge. It's a little bit harder to show you on the necklace. It will be easier to see on the bracelet, but I'll still show you nevertheless. What you want to do though for a nicer and more professional look, and this works not just on this zebra texture mat, but for any other texture mat you have. Whenever you have any kind of dents in your texture mat, try to match them a little bit in the edging. As you can see, I'm gently scooping out when there's too thick of an edging to match the imprints in the texture mat, texture of the back piece. And then simply use your roller, but this time do not press much with the roller because you don't want your raw clay to get cut. You just want to smooth it over. And as you can see, my necklace at this point is almost completely flat. No worries. Once I place it on the baking blank again, it will recover its nicely, slightly curved shape. But use the X-Acto knife or a blade to cut at an angle the edging. And do the same for the outer edging of the necklace as well as for the inner edging of the necklace. In the area where you have the bail, make sure that the edging stays only on the front of the necklace or bracelet respectively, and doesn't cover also the area where you want to put the bail, because otherwise your bail would be crooked. Now let's see it a little bit better on the bracelet. So first you place bacon bond or liquid clay, and then you place your polymer clay ribbon, fix it in place. I had a spot there that the clay kind of went away, and then gently cut off, trim off the excess clay. And if you have any indents in the backing texture, make sure that you scoop them out from the edging. Then use a little bit of alcohol to smooth out everything. And let's do that again on the other side and on the inner edge. So bake and bond, nicely smudged. Then the ribbon of polymer clay. If you want your clay to not slide around, you can wait for like 5 minutes after you place the bake and bond. That way it will be thicker and your polymer clay will not slide around so much. And then you see I'm gently folding. I'm not pressing all the fold at once. I'm going slowly. And then I scoop out, I trim roughly the excess clay, both on the back and on the front. And then I start doing some fine adjustments. Once again, do not dwell too much on this, because I will show you in this tutorial how you don't have to dwell much to work on, once again, to work on the raw clay, when all the nice and professional finishings can be done after the whole piece is baked, simply by sanding. And especially now with the sanding wand, you can do all the sanding in the world and have beautifully finished polymer clay pieces. But as you can see, getting back to the bracelet, I used alcohol to smooth all over the place, and then fine trimmed using my X-Acto knife. This is the inner side of the necklace. Again, doing the same thing, fine trimming, and then I can come back and after I use the alcohol to smooth out, because if you use the alcohol to blend and smooth, remember alcohol dissolves slightly the polymer clay, so it will fill in any tiny cracks that might exist between the new edging and the existing baked background. So you can see the difference between the half that I'm working on and the other half, inner half, that has not been worked on yet. And I'm doing the same thing on the front. Once you're done, as I said, let's start refining with sanding. Yes, I am using 120 grit. Amazing. Because I am actually shaping my piece with the sandpaper. And I'm placing flat the sandpaper on the working tile, and I'm just holding the bracelet firmly flat. And that way I will get a beautiful, perfectly even edge on my bracelet. I'm doing the same thing on the two edges, and then what is left, I'm going to go to a 240 grit to shape the angle of the edging, of that white edging, and you can see I do that with the sanding wand, and I'm going to put a link in the video description on the article I have on my blog and on my website about the sanding wand. And then all you have to do is to just use increasing grits, ideally to remove the scratches of the previous grit. I went as high as 3000 on both pieces, and once you are done with all the shaping and sanding and fine sanding, you can go ahead and buff the piece. And yes, you need to do this step before you place the bails. That will mean that after you do the final bake, you will have probably to reinforce the buffing, because most of the time the buffing kind of gets dull if you bake the piece, but you only need a few swipes of your buffing wheel to get it back to normal. And you can see I'm using the same, the 120 grit, to make a beautifully, perfectly straight line on the edge of my necklace, both for the outer edge and for the inner edge. So whatever little deformities were in the line, they are gone. Everything is perfect. And this is pretty much why I said you don't have to waste hours trying to make the finishing on your raw polymer clay, when you can do this by a few swipes of sandpaper after the clay is baked, and it's much easier to manipulate. And this is how it looks. So now let's put the bails on. And it's, again, for the bracelet, it's a little bit hard to show you how that goes on in there. So I'll do a close-up on the necklace. Put the spoon part in a blob of polymer clay. Place some Bake Bond in that hole that you left in the backing, and then simply place the spoon bail there and match a little bit with the texture on the backing, and use some alcohol to smooth it out, and that's it. So just to put the final touch is the findings, and I'm going to measure. I generally like for my closure on the bracelet cuff to be a little bit dangly, because the polymer clay is sturdy enough to not completely fall, and I don't make it wide enough, I don't make the danglies long enough for the bracelet to fall off my hand. But essentially what I do, I double the chain, and then I put the two ends together. Then I place a small blue agate bead, of course with bead caps, and with a wrapped loop before the bead and after the bead, and from the second wrapped loop will be the actual closing finding. In this case I use the double coil ring and a lobster clasp. And this is the hardest part for me, because I have problems seeing and problems with my hands, so it's a mess, but I still can do it. So I place the double coil ring, and I'm finishing the wrapped loop. Hopefully one of these days I'll be able to make a tutorial where I'll show slowly and in a very high close-up how to do all these things, but there are many tutorials on YouTube about this. Anyway, I hope to do that tutorial after I get my cataract surgery and I'll be able to see. But I placed the first bead on the one side, and now it's time for the second bead. So I united the two ends of the chain. I'm creating the wrapped loop, cutting the excess wire, placing one bead cap, the bead itself, the second bead cap, and then making the second wrapped loop, in which goes the lobster clasp. And once I placed it, after I drop it a few times, I'm creating the wrapped loop and cutting the excess wire. I love these new cutters. I'll put a link in the video description to my jewelry tools in my Amazon influencer store. It's actually, they are wire cutters for fine electronics. But you see, it looks gorgeous. And I'm going to do the same thing for the necklace. I'm measuring how long I want my chain to be. Usually I do this and I cut two lengths of that chain, because it's going to get doubled, and then to that will be added the length of the bead with the wrap loop with the closure finding. So it's going to be a perfect length of the chain. And I'm doing the same thing. The bead between a wrap loop on one end is going to be a double coil jump ring, and on the other end it will be a lobster clasp. And there we go, a beautiful set with a white-based Stroppel cane. Perfect in any way.